Hi, Dave Kites again from the Oto Woodshop. This evening we're going to make a little video about a new jig we've made for the router table. Helps you set up rabbets and dados kind of almost automatically, and eliminates a lot of the fiddling around that you have to do traditional method. So we'll explain that in a little bit. First I want to talk about generally the router table rabbeting and dadoing functions. They're generally done with the fence as the guide, and that's what we're going to do tonight. When you're going to do rabbets, you want to pick a bit that is bigger than the rabbet that you're going to make. You don't want to use a 1/2 inch diameter cutter to make a 1/2 inch wide rabbet. The cutter has to do 100% job. It has to cut its full diameter, and that's not the easiest thing for it to do. It's much better if you have a larger bit and only part of the radius has to be actually cutting wood. So to show what I'm talking about when I say it's easier for a bigger cutter to work than it is for a smaller cutter to work, here's some different cutters. Okay. In general, these cutters, 1/4 inch shank, over 1/4 of an inch in diameter cutting tool, I don't like to use them. I think that they can vibrate. I think that they are not as stable, and so I don't use a 1/4 inch unless I can't find the size cutter I want in the 1/2 inch shank. Okay, so here's a 1/2, here's an inch, 1/2, and a big one, 1 3/8. Okay, so what I want to do is we're going to say that we're going to make a 1/2 inch rabbet. So I'm going to pick as big a one as I can find that looks reasonably sharp in a 1/2 inch shank, and I'm going to use that. I wouldn't even use this nice new spiral one. I would use this one if I had it. This is 1 3/8 in diameter, and I'm only going to use a 1/2 inch of it to make the cut. I'm going to get a very high tip speed, and I'm going to get a very nice smooth cut as a result of it not having to cut across the center. If I use this one for the 1/2 inch rabbet, it's a 1/2 inch bit. The whole thing has to cut, so it has to cut all the way around, okay, from the time it enters the wood till it leaves the wood. And this one has to make the same cut through the wood, but it's only a part of its revolution. So it's working much less hard. It's working less hard. So you want to use a big one for rabbets. Dados, we would like the convenience of having the width of the cutter be the width of the dado. So we generally don't multi-step dado cuts. You could use a 1/4 inch straight bit and cut a 1/2 inch wide dado with it. You just have to set it up carefully to make 2 exact passes. Okay. Now, of course, for dados, we generally use the width of the cutter to set the width of the dado because it's very convenient. You can make dados in multi-steps, but it takes more setup and alignment, and it's just not really necessary. If you've got a wide dado to make and it's deep also, you can always take it in steps in the elevation and cut a little bit of wood at a time, which I always recommend doing because it's much easier on the machine, on you, and on your work to just take small bites and let that bit really keep spinning fast and doing a nice, easy job. So back to the rabbeting. We're going to pick a bit, and I'm going to pick the 1 inch bit. I think this red one is a sharper one. This is a shop bit. This is my bit. I pointed it out a minute ago. This is 1 3/8. Wonderful tip speed. I have to actually slow this one down to 16,000 RPM instead of the standard 21,000 RPM, or the tip speed is too high and it'll start to burn my wood. So that's what we want to do. So we're going to use this inch bit, and we're going to set it up so that a 1/2 inch of it, so right in the middle of it actually in this case, we're going to be cutting all the way 1/2 of the width. So it's still not real easy. It's a little more difficult for it than this one is, but this one will work. So we're going to do that. So pick a big bit if you're doing rabbets. All right, I'm going to start by setting up this 1/2" rabbet with this 1" bit the traditional way, without the jig. I call it traditional, the way most people do it. So I'm going to put the bit in. All we need. We're going to find us a decent spacer. Put it in the middle. Left-hand thread, snug them up. Down. And now the fun starts. What we're trying to do is set this up with the fence covering up all but a 1/2 inch of this bit. Now, to do that, we need to align this bit so that this cutting edge is as far out this way as it's going to be in its total revolution. So we kind of eyeball that. The fence doesn't have to be parallel to the table or to the slot, because we're not going to use the slot to guide. We're going to guide just on the fence, so it doesn't have to be parallel. Now, to get that 1/2 inch sticking out, what we would normally do would be to take a gauge block, hold it against the fence, and get this edge so it's sticking out as far as it can, and we would feel and look and try to get this gauge block and that edge lined up just even so that we have a 1/2 inch sticking out, and then we would snug the fence down. So we would do what I just did, and then we would run our test. Well, we would set the height next, of course, and so this is where we do the in steps thing, so we don't cut too much wood at once. I would start out after I did my test piece. Well, I would start out before I did my test piece. I would put it down here, and I would run my test piece with just that little cut. If it was good, I'd be fine. If it wasn't good, what I would do is say it's too narrow or it's too wide, and I would adjust one end of the fence a little bit, whichever way it needed to be, to try and get it to be my 1/2 inch. Checking it probably with this gauge block after I had cut one. All right, so I would have cut that, checked it for the 1/2 inch. See, this one is a 1/2 inch, a full 1/2 inch dado. And then, of course, you can use other gauge blocks to check the depth. The depth is what's going down into the wood, so you can check that. If you're doing it in steps, so to make it easy, do 1/8 of an inch. If you want a 1/4 inch dado, do 1/8, and then do a second step, and that's the one where you're going to set the depth again with the gauge block. This time, you can put the gauge block down here, and you're going to adjust it up, the cutter up, until you get so that it's just even with that, if you want a 1/4 of an inch. Okay. One thing I like to do in this case is now the new jig does not help you set the depth. Okay, so you're still going to have to do this kind of thing to set the depth. That's just a tad high, and I would lock it in and then run my test piece. Again, maybe I have to wiggle it a little bit up or down. After I run my test piece, I'll find out. I would put my 1/4 inch in here. This is not cut to a 1/4 inch, and we know it on purpose, but this one is under a 1/4 of an inch. That's how you would check the depth there. So you fiddle with that until you get that right, and then you can run your pieces. Okay, that's the traditional way. Now I'm going to show you pictures and show you how the jig works, and then I'm going to put the jig together and actually install it and show you how to put it on the machine, okay? Alright, so now we're looking at a drawing of the jig and to explain how it works. So you'll understand it. It'll be nothing to it to remember how to use it if you understand it. We've got one part here that has a bar on the bottom of it. It fits in the miter slot of the router table. And that goes in such a position right here, and it goes in the miter slot and it sits still. It's got a Rabbet side and a Dado side. If you're going to do rabbets, you put the Rabbet side towards the fence. So you put that block in. Then you'll see what cutter size you've installed. This picture says we've installed a 3/4 inch cutter. And so we picked the board. There's a bunch of boards for different sized cutters in the kit. So you pick the Rabbet 3/4 inch board, and if you set that board up against this edge of the other part of the jig, this side of this board comes out exactly even with the cutting edge of the cutter. The edge I was trying to feel and make match that gauge block, that edge. That's where it is. We know it is because this board was built very carefully so that when it's put with this and this guy's in the miter slot, we know it comes out right at the edge of a 3/4 inch diameter cutter. So now we know where we're starting. Okay, so we've got a starting place here right at that edge. Then in between the two boards, we put in a spacer. That moves this board up. This one can't move. He's in the miter slot. So this board moves up towards the fence, and it moves. So since it started right here, even with the edge of the cutter, now it's been forced to move this way, and it's now covering up this much. The spacer amount, whatever the width of the spacer was, that much of that cutter is now being covered up by this board. And the edge of the board is that much further towards the center of the thing, towards the fence, than it was before when it was right here. So now we've got the board up here, that amount. Then we bring the fence down and rest it on this edge of the board. So now, as it says here, after we do that, since the board had covered up that much, this much of the cutter, now the fence is leaving that much, this much of the cutter exposed beyond the fence, this way. So now when I take the jig away, I'm left with the fence and that much of the cutter exposed, and that's exactly what cuts the width of the Rabbet. So the width of the Rabbet is whatever the spacer is. Now that's pretty handy, because if you want a 1/4 inch spacer, you put a 1/4 inch gauge block in there. If you want a 1/2 inch, you put a 1/2, 3/8, whatever you want, you put in there. And if you don't want exactly that, if you're making a box, I hope you can see this in there. If you're making a box and this is the end and that's the Rabbet for a rabbeted corner where they go together like this, okay? And you want, oh go ahead, fall apart, I don't care. You want this board width to exactly match the Rabbet, or you want the Rabbet to be the board width. This Rabbet, remember I showed you before, was a full 1/2 inch. The board's not. The board's plywood, commercial 1/2 inch plywood. It's a 32nd small. So when I put it on there, see, it overhangs 32nd. This overhangs over 32nd. If I take this piece and I put it in there where it says spacer, it's going to move this board the amount of this thickness, and that's going to be the width of the Rabbet. And so then when I do this, they're going to match. So whatever you put in there that's going to match. So if you're using this, if you got a piece of the plywood, probably do, you probably got a side of the box. Unless it's a giant box, you ought to be able to use it on the jig. You'll see in a minute. So you put the piece of the material that you're trying to rabbet in as the spacer, and it will match. It'll cut the right width of rabbet. Okay, so now we saw how the jig works. Now we're going to actually put the jig on the machine. I'm going to show you how you would install it. You would come in, and there'll be this box, and this box will have the jig in it, and it will be stored on a little shelf I'm going to make right down underneath the router here, okay? So you get the box out, and you push down the little white part, and that unlocks it, and then you can open it up, and inside you're going to find Rabbet boards. I say Rabbets. Dado boards. I say Dado. And the baseboard. That's all that's in the box. So we're doing rabbets, so we want rabbet boards. We put in a 1-inch cutter. At this time, I don't have a rabbet board in the kit for the 1-inch cutter. I've got 3/8, half, 3/4, 1 3/8, because I wanted to test my new bit, so I made one for my new bit. I'll make a 1-inch. There'll be a 1-inch board. Let's pretend tonight that the 3/4 is the 1-inch board. Okay? But I would pick the board that matches my cutter. I put the the base in with the rabbet facing the fence, and I put the rabbet board with the right size bit up against it, and if there were a 3/4 bit in there, its bit edge would be right even with this edge at this point. Okay? Now, I want to make a rabbet, and let's say I did want to make, I was building a box, and this was the side, and I wanted to rabbet it into the end. I literally just put the piece in there, and I bring the fence down. I get it so it's even. You know, you don't want it crooked, and you don't want this tip to, you know, you got to get it all paralleled up and solid together. Pulling in the middle is better than pulling on the ends, okay? So you just pull in the middle, get it up there, tighten it down. A side benefit of the jig is if you did need the fence parallel to this miter slot, it is now parallel to the miter slot, in addition to being the right distance away to cut a rabbet this thick, or this wide, excuse me. And to take the jig out of the way, and now, if you want, you can run your test piece after you set the height. You still got to set the height. And if you're deep, you're going to take steps, okay, in the height, like I talked about before. But so you would set your beginning height, and then you can run your test piece. I'm sure it'll check out if you didn't pick the wrong board, or if you didn't match the cutter and the board, it ain't going to work. Okay, you got to match the cutter and the board size. But if you do that and you use the right edge of the board, use the side that says Rabbet this way, not the side that says Dado. That's for doing dados. We're going to do that in a little bit. But if you do this, use the right board, it's going to come out. And you shouldn't have any troubles. So that's about it for rabbets using the jig. If you want to step a really wide rabbet, you don't want to cut the whole width at once, you can do that too. Just be thinking, take a piece of paper and a pencil, and you realize I can put in, let's say I need altogether an inch wide rabbet. Okay? Well, I want to cut a quarter, I want to cut it in quarters, okay? Well, then I just start out with the right size board, but I pretend I'm only going to cut a 1/4 inch rabbet. So I put a 1/4 inch spacer in, I'll just cut a 1/4. And then I say, oh, I changed my mind. I want a 1/2 inch rabbet. I'll put a 1/2 inch in. I'll cut again. I'll cut another 1/4 of wood. But I'll only be cutting a 1/4 of an inch of wood that time, because I already cut the first 1/4. And then 3/4. And then finally put the 1 inch spacer in, and it'll cut it exactly 1 inch wide total. And you'll have done it in 1/4 inch steps for ease of handling the wood and ease on the cutter. So you can step rabbets both ways, widthwise and up and down. Okay, so much for rabbets. Okay, so now let's talk about dadoing with the new jig. Dadoing, it still helps you quite a bit with this. As I said before, we use the same size cutter bit as we want the width of the dado to be almost all the time. And if it's extra wide, we just take it in steps up into the board to make it easy on the cutter as far as not taking too big a bite at a time. So let's say we're going to do a 1/2 inch dado. Traditional way would be for me to put the cutter in the machine, of course, and put a block on. So you need to remember which size dado you're doing, because again, you're going to pick out a board for the right size cutter out of the kit. Not too hard to remember that. Again, it does not help you with the depth of the dado, only with the position of the dado. So, traditionally, we would put this in, and let's say, for example, like on this piece, we want this dado to be this far from this edge. So what we would say is that's 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to get my 3/8 inch spacer. Now, after you've made some, you can use this as a measure, but before you have any that are actually cut, you got to use something else, like the spacer. Again, I would have to position this cutter so that this time the cutting edge on this side is as far that way as it will ever be in its revolution. And I think with this cutter, that is position is right about there. And then I might take my 3/8 and I'm going to put my spacer there, and traditionally I would bring my fence up. Does not have to be parallel, it could be like that and it'll still work fine. Doesn't look good though. Anyway, you pull that up gently with the spacer in between the cutting edge and the fence, and you lock it down. Adjust the height to your first height, something like that probably, and run your test piece and see how you did on getting it 3/8 of an inch from the edge of the piece. Not too hard, easier actually than setting up a rabbet. But you still got to guess that this is in the widest place, and so you still may miss it by a little bit, and you may have to make a second attempt. If you have one already cut, you can try it with this. But again, you're counting on this being where it should be, with the cutting edge as far that way as it's ever going to be in its revolution. So that's the traditional way. Now, let's look at the pictures for the dado. All right, we're looking at pictures of the Dado JIg. See how it works, why it works. Again, we have this base piece that we put in the miter slot. That's our fixed reference. This time, though, we put it with the side that says Dado facing the fence. Okay? Then we remember what size cutter we have in there. Like this picture shows 3/4, and we find the corresponding board in the Dado set. This says a Dado board, 3/4 inch bit. That's the right board. when I put that board up against this edge of this dado base, this far edge now is aligned with this far side cutting edge of the bit, exactly with that cutting edge of the bit on the far side. Not, remember the rabbet was over here, the dado's over on this side, okay? So we got that. Now when I put my spacer in between the two boards, just like I did with the rabbet board and on the base, I put a spacer in between here. Now what I do is I've moved the edge away from this cutting edge. I've moved this edge of the board away that distance. So if I put a 3/8 spacer in there, I move it away 3/8 of an inch. Okay. And then, of course, when I bring the fence up to the board and I make it all snuggy together and I tighten down the fence here, now the fence is this far away from this cutting edge of the blade of the bit. And that's the distance, the amount of board that's going to be left from the edge of your board to the beginning of the dado. Not the middle of the dado, the beginning of the dado. Okay? So that positions it, and that's why it ends up being in the right place. Again, no measuring, just picking the right pieces, parts, and doing a decent job of snugging these together when you bring the fence up, and it'll come out. It almost has to. Okay? Now we're going to put it together. All right, now we're going to put the jig together for a dado. Okay, just show you how it goes together. Very simple. We have a 1/2 inch bit in here because we're going to cut a 1/2 inch wide dado. So I take my base piece, which does double duty, does rabbets and does dados. I'm going to put it in now with the dado side facing the fence. I'm going to find my dado board that says I'm the dado board and I'm for a 1/2 inch bit. That's the right one. Now the purple heart matches the purple heart. Before the wenge matched the wenge. Now the purple heart matches the purple heart. Now you see it's sitting on top of the cutter. We don't need the cutter. We'll just lower it out of the way. And now I want to remember I wanted 3/8 of an inch of the board to be exposed, still there, and then the dado to start. So I take my 3/8 inch spacer and I put it in between the two. Now I've pushed the board away from the far side of the cutter 3/8 of an inch. So now I'll bring the fence up. It's so simple it's kind of boring, huh? I bring the fence up, tighten the fence down, and sure enough, the fence ends up 3/8 of an inch away from the far edge of the cutter, just like we wanted. And if I put this in there, I can see it's very close. Take the jig away, set the elevation to the first elevation you want to cut of your dado. I don't know whether it'll be, in steps, or if you're just doing a 1/4 inch deep, 1/2 inch wide, yeah, you cut that all at once. Just set it at 1/4 then at the height and run your test piece. Should be good. Can't do this in steps, but you can do this in steps. And if you do, you'll have an easier time, like I said, especially for wide dados. I don't think of anything else right off to tell you. Take your time. Don't forget to take all of the jig parts away. It only takes 10 seconds to put this in and out. Don't try to finagle your piece in between here because you're going to come back later and use this again. Just take it out. Be kind to the pieces. Put them back in the box when you're done. This is the box. I made the box oversized so that we got room for more boards, so we can cover a greater variety of bit sizes, and they'll be forthcoming. If you have significant amount of work to do here and you don't have the right size board and you'd like one, just contact me, and I've got the spreadsheet to figure all this stuff out. It's all figured out on a spreadsheet. So I can just plug in whatever size cutter you want, and it'll tell me how big to make the board, and we can cut a board, and you'll have the board you need. That's okay. So that's a problem. I mean, you know, if you end up with a 5/8 or a 7/16, or I even saw a 9/16 cutter, you know. So if you end up with something like that, give me a call and we can work it out.
Is it a unique spreadsheet?
Is it?
It's a special,
It's an Excel spreadsheet just for this.
Okay, we'll try to put that as a attachment in the video.
Oh.
So that if they want to make it themselves.
Oh yeah. Sure. You can just put in there whatever cutter size you want, and it tells you how big to make the board. Of course, it's all based on, well, the dimensions for this are in there also. So if you wanted to make a new baseboard, you could make a whole jig out of the spreadsheet, using the spreadsheet. And it wouldn't have to have exactly the same dimensions as this. Well, I hope you got something out of this, and I hope you'll use it. Give me some feedback if you do use it. Either way, well, I don't need a lot of positive, but I would like to know if you had trouble or what difficulties you had or what would make it simpler or easier for you. All this can be done with a step less. I can do this all with one board if you're willing to do more calculations, but I figured with our membership, I would say we'd be better off with more boards and less calculations. So I made more boards, and so you don't have to do calculations. But it's all there in that spreadsheet if you're really interested. So there you go. And again, as with any of the jigs we have in the shop, if something happens and something gets damaged, please don't just put it back in the box and let the next guy discover it. Let me know. I know things happen and accidents happen. You're not going to go to jail or anything. I just like to know so that I can replace it and get the whole thing back where it should be. So let me know if that kind of thing happens. And I have to brag about my box. See, I made a new kind of latch here for this slide top box. We're all making slide top boxes these days, and we all like to have a way to keep the lid from coming loose. This one, you do this, push that down, it's there. And if you push the white part, it comes out. Because there's a piece that comes out underneath and comes down behind this piece here and keeps it from sliding out. Just had to show you that. Okay.
Another innovation from the Oto Wood Shop.
Yeah. So, have fun. See you around the shop.